both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too.
Welcome to Gung Ho. My name's Matt Hindra. I'm filling in for Joe Giannini, and here today we're talking with Terry Sullivan. And Terry, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, and I found out the other day that, like Joe, we were both born in Brooklyn, but when we were little kids, our parents decided to white flight out to Long Island, so we went to Hicksville. And Hicksville was brand new at the time. You know, I was 6 years old and it was 1 year old. Imagine the cultural shock of having 50,000 Brooklynese invade your Long Island home, your Long Island area. And that's what it was. Hicksville went from something like 7,000 to 67,000 in a year. And they're all like, hey, what's grass? What's this green stuff, you know?
So you grew up at a time when there was obviously the draft going on, Vietnam draft.
Yeah.
What year did you first become eligible for the draft?
I first was able to be drafted December 7th, 1964, but they didn't start sending me greetings. You know, that was on top of the letter, greetings, as if it was something positive, you know.
Like you won the lottery, right?
Yeah, right. Like those telephone calls that you get. Hi there, don't hang up. Anyhow, so I had 4 inductions. I got my first one, and my brother told me about it. I was in California. So I said, tell him to send it over here. So they sent it to California. Then I put that in an envelope inside another envelope, and I sent it to my brother, and he sent it back to California. Oh no, I'm over here. And the reason is it would have a New York postmark on it. So I'm actually in California, but I tell them I'm in New York with the letter. Then they send a thing to New York. Finally, I went in and I said, 4th induction, I said, that's it. I don't want to go. And they said, okay, well, it's either this induction or Leavenworth. And it'll be 3 to 5 years in Leavenworth, and we won't even start looking for you for another 18 months. So it's the old hurry up and wait that the Army loves to use. So after a while I said, I'm not going to wait for this. I just went in. I had friends that were peace activists, and I could have, you know, figured out a way to do the avoid it through, but I just wanted it over. So,
Right. So you want to join the Army?
I accepted the induction, September 26, 1966.
Did you have any expectation about what joining the military or accepting your?
I knew I was going to resist it. And so when I went in, I had a short mustache, maybe this short. And of course, they shaved all of the hair. You would think that they were making money selling the hair. They shave so much hair. I mean, there's nothing left. You're just completely bald when they shave your head. And then they say, you shave your mustache too. I said to them, oh, when can I grow the mustache back? And the sergeant says to me, I'm sure they'll let you grow that back in AIT, which is like 10 weeks later. Well, he was lying to me, because as soon as I get into AIT, we're in an orientation. There's 2,700 trainees, and I raise my hand and say, the sergeant told me in boot camp when I shaved my mustache that I could grow it back here. And the sergeant major, who's the highest NCO in the Army, says, all y'all, listen up. I'm going to say this once, and you better not ask about it again. The face that you have on your ID card will be the face that you present for the rest of your stay in this man's army, period. So, son of a bitch, they lied to me. But I asked my brother Richard, who was an artillery officer, about it, because I remember he had a mustache when he was an officer. And he said, they're just bullshitting you. There's no regulation against having a mustache in the Army. There are regulations about trimming it. I remember that the ID card, when they took it, was a Polaroid. So you and I know there was no negative in a Polaroid. That was the original and the only copy that went on my ID card and was laminated and preserved forever. But it was still the only copy. So they gave us Christmas leave a couple of days later. I went home to New York and I studiously started growing a mustache. Really hard work. And damned if I didn't leave that ID card on my dresser. So when I come back, they ignore it. I mean, this would take me 3 weeks to grow. So, you know, it's as plain as the mustache on my face. So, I'm standing there about a week later, after I came back with the mustache. Sullivan, fall out! The sergeant takes me up and he tells me, get your toilet bag out. I say, holy shit, somebody's ratted me out. I have grass in the locker. And I open it up. I say, wait a minute. He asked me for the toilet bag. The grass is down there. So I have this shit-eating grin on my face. I'm getting away with it. But I don't need the toilet bag because I'm not going to shave. So he closed the thing and said, sorry, Sarge, I'm going to keep the mustache. They dragged me up the entire chain of command. It took, this is 5 o'clock in the morning when this starts, because we were about to have breakfast. And it took all day long. Finally, I'm standing in the full colonel, the full bird colonel's office. Full bird colonel, he runs the whole mess. He runs the whole training center. So the sergeant major who was at the orientation, he's the one that told us about your ID card.
Right.
And I went in there and he said, you should let any thought of holding on to that mustache cease, because it is, if you disobey a direct order from a field grade officer, you may spend 3 to 5 years in Leavenworth. And he said, in time of war. And I said, Sergeant, I didn't read the papers today. Did we declare war? And he went, the criteria may be police action as far as I know. You feeling lucky? Go see the colonel. He's got the barbecue ready for your butt. Just cross that threshold. So I'm still not completely sure. But my whole deal being in the Army was to get in trouble in little nickel and dime things. Not anything big like killing an officer or anything, you know. So anyhow, I go in and salute the colonel, and it looks like trouble at the outset because the guy's got fatigues on. And that's one thing for infantry officers. But for a full bird colonel medical officer, they're usually dressed in dress greens, you know. And this guy is like really strack troop. His sleeves are so starched, you could have cut cold butter with his sleeves. So I understand you're making trouble in the company area, disobeying direct orders. I said, well, Colonel, I don't believe they're legal orders. Really? I said, well, they tricked me. How was that they tricked you? Well, they told me I could grow my mustache back in AIT, and I'm in AIT, and now they tell me something else. Well, it doesn't look like you've broken any regulations. Go down to your company area, get that mustache trimmed, and put on an ID card. Dismissed. Thank you, sir. The whole day, they bullshitted me. But they didn't realize just how stubborn I was. And I got stubborn deep in my DNA. I mean, my mother even had a phrase for it. It's, there's no sense being Irish if you're not going to be stubborn.
You avoided going to Vietnam, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that process like? Was it a daily grind to have to come up with some, or did it just sort of one school led into maybe I'll do this and sidetrack here?
It was total seat of the pants, improvised on a dime in for $1. It was, you know, once you decided something, you know, stick with it and see what they would do. I told them when I went in that this wasn't, you know, I told them within the first week of basic training that I wanted conscientious objector status, right? And what did they do? They sent me to a very scary sergeant, a guy who had half of his face was scar tissue. And you're looking at this one eye. And of course...
You're scaring me already.
I was scared, but I still said, it doesn't change anything. They didn't do anything. They didn't give me any paperwork. They didn't, no. They just sent me to that sergeant.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing.
Yeah.
Do you have, I'm assuming you have writing that's directly related to the late 60s or your time in the military or,
oh, yeah.
or the peace movement or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there something you'd like to read for us that maybe is a short piece that we could fit into this?
I have a weird sense of humor.
That's okay.
And you like
all right.
You haven't guessed that already.
Yeah, we figured that out.
So this is a story about a colonel who was a real interesting character, and he was a World War II vet. He was a full colonel, full bird colonel, and I was working, taking care of officers. Some people might say I had it made in the shade. It was 1967, and the Vietnam War was raging on, and I was stateside. But I was still in the damn army. So every piece has a song that goes with it.
Okay.
Gonna take a sentimental journey, take us back to the Vietnam War. Okay, so I was stationed at Fitzsimmons General Hospital, taking care of quarantined officers on the tuberculosis ward. Now, smoking Gauloise, a French cigarette with a big bouquet, was a way to remind myself there was a world outside, somewhere. It was a very un-Army thing to do. In a similar way, they swayed Colonel Clancy, retired MP. I was sweeping the floors on the TB ward, smoking my Gauloise and daydreaming about outside somewhere. puffing and sweeping, sliding along on those military deep sheen wax floors, and I heard out of the blue, "Sullivan, come in here." It's Colonel Clancy. "Yes, Colonel? Problem?" "No, no, no. Come in here and blow some of that beautiful stink around my room." Okay. Clancy had not inhaled the Gaulois bouquet since he was a 20-year-old soldier in France in 1945. "It's Paris. It's what all those cabarets smelled like. What a time that was. We were young. We were scared shitless. We were brave. The French loved us. And we were grateful. We were alive, and we were pushing the Germans back over the Rhine." Funny. That's what all those cabarets smelled like, that cloud of Gaulois. But it's funny how little of that smell it took. You just walking by smoking, and I was back there. Well, Colonel, they say that the olfactory sense is the shortest route to your memory. Listen to you, Sullivan. Olfactory. You go to college or something? College? If I went to college, you think I'd be stuck in this rat hole? No. Is that so? Well, Sullivan, you're the worst kept soldier I ever seen. But you do seem to care about your job here. What's your problem? Well, between you and me, Colonel, I hate the Army. All this chicken shit power plays these people pull and this spit and polish. What do you got to shine your shoes for? To shoot somebody? No. I just don't care about that crap. I care about the patients. Shit, they're stuck in here like me. It's like the prisoner and the prison guard, you know? I got about 10% more freedom than you guys got. And soon, you're going to be laid up in the shade and on the mend. You worry too much about bullshit, Sullivan. Do your time. Stay in line. Get yourself an honorable. You're just looking for trouble. Oh, you're right there, Colonel. I'm looking, but I can't help myself. If somebody's acting like a bully because he's got rank on me, I call him on it. I mean, nobody else is going to tell them, and they need to know they're full of shit. I'm doing them a service. I pick and choose which bullies to stand up to, of course, because it can be a dangerous game in this man's army. Why don't they just fire me? I asked them to. Sullivan, you're an accident waiting to happen. You're bound to run into the wrong man and make the wrong choice, especially in this man's army. You're a good kid, but you're too easy to read. Your heart's right on your sleeve, and you can't even see it. What you see is what you get, Colonel. Oh, I hope God has a good plan for you, Sully, because your strategy is not too smart. Not to mention your poor guardian angel. He's got to be worn out with all the overtime he's got racked up watching over you. Well, we got plenty of time to straighten you out. Now, whenever you have one of those frog smokes of yours, bring it down this way. Give an old soldier a trip down memory lane. Now, I got to take my afternoon nap, so you be good. I'll try, Colonel. No, you won't, but take care. Colonel Clancy was intrigued by me, but he couldn't understand my risk-oblivious behavior towards the Army. Later on, he would counsel me to shape up and shave a goatee that I grew, just to annoy the company commander into throwing me out of the Army. I got thrown out anyway, but I did have to hurry up and wait for them to take their sweet time. Clancy went out of his way to visit me in the stockade, even though he was a retired, off-base outpatient at the time. I was really touched by this decent gesture. I wasn't aware until then that a colonel, a military police colonel, could be a human being sometimes. On the other hand, compare Clancy with the commandant of the jail where he visited me. There was a psychiatric patient named George Watson. George was too dangerous for the entire staff to handle. George was big. George was 6'5". He was 275 pounds of 99% fat-free muscle. And he was paranoid. And George thought that I knew what the Army was going to do to him, whether they were going to send him to the loony bin or to Leavenworth, and he was going to beat it out of me. Well, luckily, the guards rescued me before George did too much damage, and there I was outside the cell, and George was inside, and that silly-ass commandant comes back, and when the commandant came to the lockup after the guards had rescued me, he looked at me and said to the guard, "Why isn't that prisoner in his cell?" Seemed to be a security risk, sir. I don't think he'll bother George anymore. Put him back. But sir, son, do as you're told. Now, Mr. Sullivan, and we call you Mr. because you don't have any rank anymore. You see, you're going to learn something today. First of all, that's a demotion. You're going back in there with your Negro friend. And I know you love them Negroes because I got reports you pal around with them off base, don't you? Now, I'm sure Big George is going to help you learn that something today, and I don't want you whining. Because remember, you love these Negroes. He opened the cell block door and said, "Oh, one more thing you can learn today. It's just a question of mind over matter. I don't mind that you don't matter." To illustrate George's lack of anger management, he had recently resolved another physical altercation in Vietnam with his first sergeant and his commanding officer. He killed both of them. And I'm alone in the stockade with George. So, we will finish that saga later. Looking back on this saga in the year 2020, you might call this 2020 hindsight. Ba-dum-bum. Colonel Clancy was right. I was a wild 20-year-old kid running on rage and reflex, and when any alleged superior in the Army tried some chicken shit power play, I resisted, sometimes unwisely. So it was with the MP captain, but he saw me as an it, a zero, a Yankee of the lowest order, a Negro lover. Being a friend of Negroes was unthinkable to him and codified as illegal in his hometown in Texas. This was late 67. Race relations were closer to 1867 in his bailiwick in the Army. The Southern non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and the corporals that trained us, thought nothing of polarizing the troops even further with their regional insults for Yankees, New Yorkers, and worst of all, Californians. They called them from the land of fruits and nuts, thereby, in one short insult, pairing their disdain for gays and anyone who might have PTSD. The Army culture was rife with this overcompensating hollow macho. I grew up with bullies, and I find them morally bankrupt. I was just as angry as they were, but more scatterbrained and loose. I grew out of my own inclination to bully. Now, my resistance to the Army was guerrilla style, seat of the pants, improvised on a dime, in for $1. My plan was to get out of the Army before they killed me. I was lucky with most of my choices of what to resist, who to piss off, but you don't want your life hanging in the balance on the whims of Lady Luck. You know, it's not, as the Colonel said, not a really smart strategy. 53 years later, I still need to tone down my anger, but my game plan would still aim at the same goals, because in 1966, we should have had an alternative for people like me who resisted, like the Peace Corps, instead of forcing us to go support corrupt dictators halfway around the world for questionable political reasons. And it would have been easy for everybody concerned. But rational thinking was not. They just blind obedience. Shut up and stay in line. So, oh yeah, most importantly, my perspective here is one of a rebel, a black sheep, who will always have an outsider's view of whatever, you know, societal system you throw at me. But every day nowadays, there seems to be something on the radio or a newspaper about some institution that you're supposed to be, you're supposed to revere, you're supposed to trust. And I'm honored that one of the weirdest cartoonists ever, Gayan Wilson, was a friend of mine. And so we were having Christmas dinner, and we were talking about how all of the major banks conspired to pass the trash and make believe that those bundled mortgages were real. Even Standard & Poor's. Standard & Poor's stamped a AAA rating on those mortgages. And so people believed them and so undermined the financial system and caused the crash of 2008. So we're talking about this, and I remember Gayan saying, I'm 83 years old. I've been skeptical all my life. Turns out, I wasn't skeptical enough. Gonna take a sentimental journey, take us back to the Vietnam War. That's it.
Terry Sullivan, folks. Thank you for watching.
They now used to be a walk away in my hometown, but they're so far away, as far as walking